Over the last few months, you've no doubt heard or read about our guide for enactment of design-build legislation, model legislation, and updated 2023 State Statute Report. You may even have read about some of the recent design-build legislation victories in Virginia, California, Florida, and other states. And if not, you'd better check out the DBIA Design-Build Delivers blog and go back and listen to a few recent episodes of this show, the Design-Build Delivers podcast, and also check out our new podcast bonus content. But you can do all that later. For now, I am Erin Looney, well, for now and forever, and in this episode of the Design-Build Delivers podcast brought to you by USCAD, East Coast Region VP of Operations for Lydig Construction, Vince Campanella, and Vanir Construction's Vice President and Director of Design-Build Program and Services, Mike Meredith, talk about those advocacy resources once again, this time focusing on their application and contextualizing them within the industry and legislative arenas broadly. While we've talked quite a bit about the Guide for Enactment of Design-build Legislation and our updated 2023 State Statute Report lately, this episode is here to break them down even more. We can think of this as really covering the who, what, when, where, why, and how. So to start, it is worth taking a moment to hear from you both as a reminder of what these advocacy and legislation resources contain.
There are three documents here. The State Statute Report is something that DBIA has been preparing and updating every year for quite some time now. And so it's a critical document because the legislation changes in various states over time, over the year. And this document gives everybody a relatively current snapshot of exactly where we have authority, how the authority is vested, which market sectors have authority, and the levels of authority that they have. So that's very critical. The guide was developed to give people that are looking to gain design-build authority or expand design-build authority kind of a roadmap of steps to take in order to do so. How to build a coalition of people or supporters, how to deal with adversity, and the steps that go through that, as well as some good basic information of design-build and the differences between design-build and other delivery methods. And then the model legislation document itself is modeled after several current statutes that authorize design-build through progressive design-build. It's very current of common language you would find within a statute or a law. And it's a guide for people to use as kind of a starting point to develop their own statutes.
DBIA is the leading design-build authority. They've created a comprehensive data resource document for design-build legislation for everyone in the country. As design-build is on its way to being a contractual delivery method of choice, this document is important for the industry to have a comprehensive tool, and I believe it's reliable in terms of what specific legislative acts apply to each state. So again, I really think it's how do you utilize this document and what's behind it, right? The design build done right and design build best practices. And this is a great tool, right? It's a great template, a great guide to help folks understand a broad range of circumstances that they may come along in front as they think about design build legislation.
So, Mike, you hit on something important there that we're going to come back to a little bit later in the show. You talked about the best practices and that connection. So hang on to that thought. It sounds to me, after hearing you two talk about this, that it's three really valuable resources. So what was the event or the events that made DBIA say, we really need to put this on paper?
Over the last couple of years and working with Richard and Stephen and everybody on advocacy, is one of the major questions that they're always asked when somebody's looking to develop either design build authority or expand it, is the language to do so. And so developing a model legislation, developing the kind of the standard language that would make up a typical law or statute, we felt that was a very important step to do. And so when the committee and I started working on this, I'm from Washington State. We've got, I would consider, some of the best design build laws in the country. They're very simple. It includes progressive now. We've added that specific language in the law over the last few years. and it's wide open to every sector in the state, every market sector. So we kind of use that as a baseline and expanded on it. We added the glossary, we added definition of terms, added some other things that are not specific in the Washington state statute, but they're critical things that we believe are necessary in order to further define design build and to follow DBIA's best practices. So it's a document that's written around not only progressive, but best value selection. And it does give some inferences in there as to what the differences are. Primarily, everything is qualification based. From there, it diverges a little bit into what the proposals are and between cost and price proposal, and we define what that is. But that was the basis of the document, and then really kind of incorporating what was recently published by DBIA regarding progressive best practices as well.
What strikes me here is that I think first we need to give credit to Vince as the committee chair. So something like this just doesn't happen overnight. There is a process to it. Richard Thomas and Stephen Askew have been part of DBIA's, legislative resource and staff for several years. And I view this as something that's kind of come together along the way. For years, DBIA has been promoting education, best practices, et cetera. And those are really just so fundamental. So I think in terms of why did this hit critical mass finally to where the Leg Committee decided to put it on paper is really it's a natural evolution, right? The Design-build State Statute Report that lists every single state and a comprehensive listing of all of their legislation. There's a natural next step, right, of trying to collate all of these ideas across the country and fall on a legislative best practice. And you could argue that it's been a long time coming. However, I really also think that a lot of work and effort had been in place, and this was just a matter of gathering all that intelligence and trying to put it in a simplified document that is a very good, straightforward guide.
Are you interested in sustainable design and construction practices but concerned about profitability? USCAD, an Archons company, helps forward-thinking ENR top-ranked AEC firms in mitigating risk and driving profit through digitalization using Autodesk AEC technology. To learn more, contact uscad.com/DBIA for a free 30-minute consultation. That's uscad.com/DBIA. Now, let's move on to the why. Why is it important to maintain a resource like the State Statute Report, and why was developing the model legislation the right move?
The State Statute Report is something DBIA has been publishing for years. The side story in all this, though, is a couple of years ago, there was a parallel State Statute Report for progressive only that was developed by staff that was never released. And one of the charges that the committee had a couple of years ago was advance that, get that to the point where it could be published. And then in the discussion of doing that, what came up was why not just combine the two reports so that staff and committee are only reviewing and managing one report every year. So this report that was recently published is actually the combined state statute report now that has the progressive component within it. It's a great synopsis of the full range of design build authority within the U.S. So anybody that's looking to get an idea of exactly what, regardless of what state they're from or what market they're in, if they're looking to find out what they can do or not do, this will give them a quick synopsis of exactly what they can do. And then also, if you are, say, an organization or you're somebody within DBIA that's looking to take the next steps in your state to advance legislation, this gives you an idea where the starting point is. And like I said earlier, the laws change every year. Sometimes they're very, very subtle. And so updating this report every year keeps it fresh in understanding what's out there. In some cases, the things that we've got to play defense on. And so that ongoing monitoring that ultimately makes it into the state statute report is a critical thing for making sure DBIA is on top of exactly what's going on nationwide.
The industry deserves a comparative tool, I think. And this is very reliable in terms of its legislative acts that apply to each state. Again, at the risk of being redundant, DBIA is the leading authority on design build. Who better to put together a document like this for the industry to lean in on? Vince mentioned state of Washington's very solid legislative language up there. And here in California, where I happen to do most of my business, one of the things that I've observed is there's been such a scattering of pieces of legislation, right? And particularly in government, where you have so many different varieties of government, right? Whether they're joint powers authorities, state governments, local, county, city governments, water districts, all of them want design build, and I think they all very much have lobbied for it. But the notion of how you get that, it seems like never ending want for authority collated into a document that functions as a guide in a single resource, I think is fantastic. What better way for the industry to now have something to hand or email to somebody who might be looking for that?
We've discussed how we got here and where exactly here is. So we're going to go into that deep dive that DBIA is known for. How do you recommend design build advocates use the model legislation? How do you put it into practice?
Well, the model legislation, again, is a guide. It's kind of a snapshot of the basic parts and pieces you need that would typically be reflected in a law or a statute. Obviously, different states have different nomenclature. They have different structure. Advocates within the various regions, if they're trying to use the document, they can take that and they can morph it into the structure that they need that suits their state just fine. So again, it's meant to be a tool, but it's not meant to be the end all. I mean, everybody's going to have to play with it and personalize it to what they need it to be. On the State Statute Report, it's the resource for the current status of authority within the United States. And so it gives everybody at least where to look, because it's all the by state, it's in there by by whatever the law or the statute is, it's by number. So it's an easy reference to get online and find out exactly what the full language is. And then you can figure out, if necessary, how to apply the model legislation document to expand that.
The DBIA Ledge Committee gets asked constantly, is there a sample? Is there anything I can look at? Now we have a specific document that's been thoroughly vetted that you can easily distribute to the industry. The thing I like about it, in addition to just being able to provide something, is it's now the opportunity for feedback, right? So the Ledge Committee, I think, is going to serve the industry even better when we are able to get critiques and we can further edit, further tidy it up, catch any and all nuances, right? The other thing I really like about this is that we touch a lot of bureaucratic folks, legislative folks, local politicians, et cetera, that are not like intuitive to the design and construction industry. And I really think that if we can get folks to read a relatively short, concise document that paints a very clear picture of this, it just is going to drive consistency in the industry. And I really think that overall is just going to benefit and provide and make for better outcomes. That's really what we're about.
So through the magic of podcasting, we are going to move into the future just a little bit. Let's say it's 2026. Design build now accounts for half of all construction spending, just like FMI projected. States and regions are using these resources to get us to that half. Now, we've got some bills that have been passed. Surely that's not the end of the conversation about design build in that state. Vince, you mentioned that the laws change, and you mentioned playing defense. So how can states avoid what you told me in our planning session is called legislative erosion?
Well, yeah, we joke about it sometimes within the legislative committee, and we talk about it. We do our sessions at the conference of playing defense, and it takes a lot to get what DBIA wants for best practices within these statutes or these laws. Once we get those, it's important to make sure we don't lose authority or we don't see that type of thing erode. And so really, this is the stuff where the advocacy folks really pay attention. They're out there looking at these bills. They're getting notices from the various regions or from chapters nationwide about something that may be coming up in session that might affect legislative authority within a state. I know Richard just recently has been down in Virginia, in Richmond, testifying against a bill that was going to take away design-build authority after Virginia's had it for quite some time now and passed it and expanded it, and now they were looking to restrict it. That's the kind of stuff where advocacy really plays a key role here, is going down and finding out what industry group is doing this. Is it a union? Is it a trade association? Try to figure out what's their issues with design build, or is design build just mixed up in it because they have an issue with alternative delivery? And then try to pick away at that. Talk to the sponsors, the legislative sponsors that might be pushing it, find out why they've got an issue, testify at committee hearings and those kind of things, and essentially tout most of the things the DBIA stands for is the success of design build across the country, the fact that it's going to become, if not very close to, the predominant project delivery method around the country. The proof is in the success of the projects that are being delivered every day around the country. So the more and more we build that list of projects out there and the more we get advocates for it, the easier the job becomes.
Yeah, I always find it very, very interesting that there could even be a movement for what is going on in Virginia. What's the motive there, right? And it's probably often politics or a comfort zone. And I think it's always good to kind of come back to one thing that I've heard over the years, in that if a project goes bad with a design bid build or low bid project, it's always the contractor's fault, right? In design build, if a contract seems to go bad or a project goes bad, it's the delivery method, right? And so I always am mindful that when you have stuff like that, it's just proof that there is still anxiety that exists in the industry about utilizing design build. So for DBIA and those in the industry who are just very, very much sold on design build, what I'm trying to emphasize here is that it's mostly about being proactive in holding the industry accountable to doing design build done right and to uphold the design build standards. I think that the risk of it, of us having a reversal on it, become less and less because it's more and more understood, and that there'll be less and less opportunity for people to try to pick on the legislative authority for it. And it just becomes more ingrained, and that it would just become politically prohibitive to go try to change the law. So I think like this is just one of those knock on wood anomalies, and that as time goes that we get past that.
One of the defining factors of DBIA's impact on the industry is that best practices primer. Mike, you mentioned this at the top of the show and a couple times since. Vince, you also touched on it. So this is obviously a really important piece. Everything we do comes back to design build done right. So let's sort of compress some of that conversation we've been scattering throughout and situate these legislative resources within that mission.
You almost can't talk about legislation without talking about the DBIA best practices or design build done right, right? They're just very, very interchangeable. And I would suggest to the audience, if you get a chance, you should look at your own legislation. And then I would suggest that you also look at the guide and or the addendum to appreciate that these particular things that we're suggesting be in the form of legislation. And a lot of it has to do with the procurement steps, right? Of how you create a process that is really about making a subjective process objective. And that's really where, to me, where the rubber hits the road. It's all in there. I just think that you'll begin to appreciate how interwoven legislation is with what DBIA does.
One of the things that came up even in trying to finalize these documents over the last several months is DBIA was actually publishing a fair amount of really great updated documents with regard to best practices. And then there's obviously a lot of back documentation on DBIA's position on things like best value and those type of things. Those were awesome documents to refer to make sure that we were weaving in really a lot of the critical information that DBIA was pushing and advocating for. And a lot of it was just in the language cleanup, especially on progressive, since it is something that is relatively new in the scheme of design build. But a lot of the best practice documents have come out just recently on progressive. And so as we were going through final review within the committee, we were incorporating a lot of the stuff that was just being published. We were making sure that we were making those subtle changes to make sure the language was consistent throughout and that we weren't publishing something or writing something that was in conflict with what they had just published as a best practice. So from my perspective, I think the documents really mimic and repeat very well and support the current state of design build best practices. And like we talked about, a lot of this is a living document. We can make changes to that document as things update or as the committee discovers important aspects of legislation that need to be in there. And then it doesn't impact the guide. It can be just an updated addendum. Just like the State Statute Report, the Leg Committee is going to have to continue to monitor are we staying current with how DBIA is evolving best practices? And we've got to make sure that we continue to support that.
And that was a correct answer. We love to hear, the resources have been useful. Now we're going to shift a little. Of course, our job on the Design Build Delivers podcast is not to get political, but it is impossible to escape the political climate when you're talking about legislation. Anything that involves elected officials is going to be affected by the politics of the day. Now, without telling us how you vote or which politicians give you the ick, let's talk about the relationship between the political landscape, regardless of what it is, and design build advocacy and these resources.
I mentioned I'm in California. I had spent 24 years with the Department of General Services and was very fortunate to be in the right place at the right time, where I was on the first authorized design build project benefiting from recent legislation in 2000. And then I was on the first authorized progressive design build project benefiting from recent legislation in 2019. Coincidentally, I'm back in the private sector and I'm helping a state of California agency with different than general services, utilizing progressive design build under their first authority. So I've kind of been through the how do you get it? And most of my experience has been done with it. When you're a state agency, often you have your own kind of leg committee and legislative office within your state department. And one of the things I learned was, interestingly enough, initially design build was kind of poo-pooed on by state unions. And the state unions were often the professional engineer group. And it was a bit of lack of education about what it was. But I think there's a reality in that even state governments don't have the wherewithal to just do every design and have unlimited resources. But to convince them was something very unique. The other thing that I learned with progressive was the building trades treated it as an opportunity or leverage to get, in our case, project labor agreements instituted. So you quickly learn that politics are what they are, and it's often working towards the middle to resolve something. And with progressive, it was, of course, their end goal was to have project labor agreements. But one thing I thought was sort of a very good complement to that was the governor's office took that opportunity to work into the legislation a requirement for local or underutilized community groups to be able to leverage those desires. There was this opportunity to bring those two divergent ideas or ultimate desires together and to create something that benefited both parties. We completed the projects, had no issues with it. The union stepped up and allowed for those folks to enter into the union. I think the projects and the community benefited by, and we called it a community workforce agreement, is really what it was. And I think pulling those types of things together are how you deal with political landscape.
Mike's example is great. And I think within your state or within your region or something, the best you can do is get people out to talk with legislators, advocacy days, I know a lot of our trade associations do those. They'll go to Olympia here in Washington. Other places do the same thing. They go to their state capitals. You have certain days when they'll go over and they'll testify in front of committees and things like that. There is a tremendous amount of political clout when legislators hear from people within their districts about a pro or con for a particular bill, regardless of what side of the aisle you side with. Typically, there's always going to be a good coalition of people within the industry that are going to support or be against a specific bill. Go to your state capitol, testify at a committee meeting, let your voice be heard. There is a tremendous amount of power in doing that. And the same goes with DBIA. One of the things our Pacific Northwest region pushes for is for DBIA to be that resource, to be the authority in design build. And so even when industry associations, AGC, CMAA, or some of the big agency or industry associations are looking for information on design build, we want to be that group that they go to get that information. And part of that is because we do have the most current information on whether it's legislative, on best practices or anything. We want that to be out. I mean, we want other industry associations to be advocates for us when they're looking to push things that are related to design build. So there's a lot of cross-pollination. I'm on the AGC's legislative committee. I get a lot of my information for DBIA in the Northwest based upon what our lobbyists are telling us. And so that cross-pollination amongst all the various associations benefits the industry tremendously. And at the end of the day, it works great for DBIA and works great for design build done right.
So let's end with some fortune telling. The model legislation, it's very new, so we just released it. So we're probably going to have to do a follow-up episode down the road to look at the actual success stories it helps to create. But for now, and we don't want to get all pie in the sky here and say everyone will love design build and it will make us all billionaires, but we can get creative. What are the top 2 or 3 victories you would like to see now that we have this roadmap to work from?
National is pushing very hard on expanding progressive. And the model legislation document itself is a push towards that. It highlights the 2 things that DBIA is pushing the most on, which is the qualification-based selection, which is best value and progressive. And so just seeing victories across the country to expand progressive design build authority across the country is to see more and more of that, I think will be good. And I think that would be a really good outcome from the model legislation. There are other states I know that we've targeted. Mississippi is one, is to see expansion or to get progressive design build authority in Mississippi, just to see those expansions within other markets around the country. Like I said, like we talked about earlier, the document is very neutral when it comes to market or state. It's really meant to be, you can take it and you have to kind of personalize it or adapt it to suit what you're looking for. But it's a great starting point, and that's where either regional or national advocacy can really assist in putting that together.
So if I were to kind of speculate on what might evolve as a result of the first 30 years of hard work DBIA has done, number one, I want to get to 60% of all projects that are doing design build by 26 or 27. And it seems like we've got a lot of momentum going right now. And this progressive design build is such a rage right now. I hope that's one of them. I also hope that all of this attention also evolves into the DBIA standard contracts being used on a more regular basis, that public agencies lean in on that a little bit more, since virtually, like, gosh, I'll bet it's way over 90% of all of them are based or have their genesis in low bid contracts that have just sort of been tweaked, and that there's sort of a fundamental change of just the protection of a public owner. I have a desire and a hope that generations behind us just don't have much low bid experience, right? It's like, and I think this is the case of what they don't know won't hurt them in the future. I hope that it's mostly all design build. When DBI was created, it was created by a small group of contractor-based firms and people who were very much interested in seeing the industry evolve and improve from kind of a nasty, litigious environment. And when you realize that the contractors weren't relishing in that sort of adversarial relationship, they wanted to change. And it's easy to say that owners and designers and subconsultants and subcontractors or trade partners all felt the same way. And this is all about how to make the industry more efficient and improve. And Aaron, just to kind of take that pun away from you, it's like, I hope that everybody does become a bazillionaire, because
I didn't say I didn't want us to. I just said, let's try to take it in steps.
yeah, but if you buy into just the thought, right, just a little bit, it makes everybody's energy to get up and go work on building great things that we do in this industry all that much easier. Again, it's about happy, have fun at work, and enjoy the process and having fantastic outcomes for everybody. If this legislative guide offers up a little bitty platform that speaks to all of that, then all the better.
Whether any of us become billionaires or bazillionaires remains to be seen, and well, I can't promise it's ever going to happen. But I can promise DBIA has your back for all things design build done right, and hey, doing things right certainly can't hurt those billionaire odds, right? So why not start with using the Guide for Enactment of Design-build Legislation, Model Legislation, and updated 2023 State Statute Report to advocate for enacting or advancing design build where you live, and we'll see how it goes with the billionaire trek. Thanks to Mike Meredith and Vince Campanella for joining the show. And look for more on our Design Build Delivers podcast bonus content from Mike and Vince, as well as special guest DBIA's Director of State and Local Legislative Affairs, Richard Thomas. Richard breaks down what happened in Virginia recently that Mike and Vince kept talking about in the episode. In the meantime, check out the Design Build Delivers blog for more resources. And as always, the Design Build Delivers podcast couldn't happen without me. I'm kidding. It couldn't happen without Fred Yee's production skills, DBIA headquarters studio, and USCAD's ongoing support. Learn more at uscad.com/DBIA.